It's like this gorgeous, gorgeous green. For 2023, I'm actually planning on reading a lot more of my physical TBR. I do have to say that it was predictable for me. I mean, the year's going quickly, just not that quickly. Hello lovely bookworms, I'm Esmay from Paradise of Pages on Instagram and also on Twitter, and welcome to a new video. If you think I'm pre-recording a couple things, I am really trying to get into the swing of posting 2 times a week, so a reading vlog and a regular video around Friday. So Tuesday and Friday are for now the schedule, and today I'm actually going to be talking about my January wrap up. I mean, the year's going quickly, just not that quickly. It is currently the 4th of February, and so I thought it would be high time I tell you which books I've read in January. I've once again started up the graphs, so we're gonna do that a little bit as well. But let's start with the first and one of the most important things, and that's the amount of pages I've read. I'm going to add that to every single month from now on. And the amount of pages I've read is 3,261. And I have read 9 books, 8 and a DNF, but 9 in total because I almost finished the DNF. And yeah, let's just start with the graphs, I think. Let's start with the least interesting ones. So let's start with my age category. So I have 5 that are young adults and I have 4 that are adults. Then moving on to whether I've reread something this month, I have reread 3 books and then there are 6 new ones. I can't do 6, but 6 new ones. Then speaking of pages, I have 3 that are between 300 and 350. I have 2 that are between 350 and 400. Then I have 3 that are between 400 and 450. And then there's 1 between 200 and 250, but that's because that was a DNF. So, speaking of formatting, I feel like I have a nice pie chart for this one as well. So I have 5 physical ones, 2 audiobooks, and 2 ebooks. Speaking of stars, I have 3 that are 5 stars, 3 that are 4 stars. I have 1 DNF, 1 2-star, and 1 3-star. And then finally, speaking of the genre that I've read during this month, I'm finally feeling like myself again. I've read 7 fantasy books, 1 thriller, and 1 historical fiction, which is, I think, a new genre for me. I doubt I'll be reading a lot of those, but I've read 1 nonetheless. So let's start with the first 3 books that I've read during this year, and these are actually rereads. When it was around the new year, I was really in the mood to start reading again, and I thought it would be nice to start with something very young adult, very quick. And so in, I think, the span of a day, I read, or reread, I have to say, The Selection, The Elite, and The One by Kiara Cass. These 3 are very much young adult books, and I read them first when I was like years and years ago, I think, which is also why the books are a little bit more yellow, because I've had them for so long. This is about a woman that enters something called The Selection, and in the selection the crown prince is trying to find a wife. And I do have to say that the more I read this, the less fan of them I am. Let's put the red one in the front so I'm not completely white. But I keep liking these less and less every single year. I have kept them at 5 stars, so these are the 3 that I gave 5 stars because I gave them 5 stars when I read them the first time. But I don't think I would give them 5 stars now. That said though, it was 5 stars for me back then, and I was in love with them back then. For now, they're pretty much young adults. I don't think I'll, not anytime soon for sure, but I doubt I will reread these. In general, I might get rid of them, but we'll see about that. But for now, these are the first 3 books that I've read in the month of January. For 2023, I'm actually planning on reading a lot more of my physical TBR, and that is really starting in February. But for January, I kind of tried, but there is 1 book that I had started, I think in the beginning of January, and I wanted to finish, which is for me an audiobook actually, and that is Shiver by Ellie Reynolds. I think it's Ellie Reynolds. It's been a while since I read this one. Yeah, it's Ellie Reynolds. This is a thriller. So this book is about a group of snowboarders that used to compete years and years ago, and one of our main protagonists is actually invited back to the resort that they used to snowboard at, and actually one of them went missing within the group. Nobody knows what happened to her. Her body was never found, and as they go back to the resort years and years later with the same group that they had back then, they try and figure that out, but there's someone out there who is trying to get the truth a little bit more than the others. It was really an interesting book. I do have to say that it was predictable for me, and quite early on I realized who was doing what. So for me personally, I would have liked, I don't know, just a little bit more suspense because it was quite predictable. That said, it was a fun audiobook. I really enjoyed listening to it. It was not that long, which is good for me for thrillers. I don't like my thrillers to be way too long, but this was a good book to sort of start off the year with a different genre than fantasy. Then I read what I think to be the biggest book of the month. This is a book that was a really anticipated release for me and I hadn't yet read it, and that is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. So this follows the daughter of the moon goddess as she is stressed from her home and is trying to find her way to help her mother. I love the copy that I have, by the way. It is stunning. I think it is, was it signed? Yeah, it was signed. Forgot about that. It's like this gorgeous green. I love green. Green is one of my favorite colors. But this was such an interesting book because basically or essentially they are on, I think, the celestial kingdom. So it's kind of close to the sun and close to the moon. They're all immortals, and our main protagonist meets the prince and becomes his companion. And I expected quite a bit more from this book. Nonetheless, I did really enjoy it. I think the narration of this was great because I listened to quite a bit of the audiobook for this one too. And in general, I feel like this book is a little bit overhyped. I said it. I think it is a little bit overhyped. I, for one, do have to say that I loved the way it was written. It is very flowery, and if you like descriptive books, I think this is definitely something that you will wholeheartedly enjoy. For me, I didn't really feel the need for certain story arcs, and while I was interested and am in love with the characters, I think it would have been nicer to leave out certain things. I won't say anything because I might spoil it for you, and I will definitely read the second book because I own it. I think it's like right behind me here. So I will definitely read the second book at some point, but for now I don't really feel the need to immediately continue. The ending for me was not that shocking that I kind of need to continue. But I did enjoy it. I think it's a beautiful, beautiful book. And it is beautifully written. I think the writing style is beautiful, something that I really, really enjoy. I think it was, yeah, it is first person, so that always hits different with me. I personally prefer first person to third person perspectives. And in general, I think it is a really good book. I think I gave it 4 stars, if I remember that correctly. Yeah, I gave this one 4 stars, so it was definitely up there, but there were certain, like a couple of things that made sure that it wasn't a 5-star for me. So still a really, really good book. I really enjoyed reading it, and I'm quite happy that I got this chunker down because it was quite big. I think it is, yeah, it's nearly 500 pages actually. 498. So there's that one. Alright, let's then move on to my DNF of the month, and I came to about like 260 pages in, I think. 250, so about halfway through, and that is Star Daughter by Shweta Thakkar. This is about a girl who lives in the real world, which I think is immediately my problem, who's the daughter of a star, and her mother is no longer in the picture, and she comes from, I believe, to be an Indian family. Personally, I just didn't enjoy the storytelling. For me, it felt a little bit too much of trying to be funny whilst not being funny. I didn't particularly care about the characters. The main protagonist, it just I didn't really like them, and at some point I was just reading and pushing myself to continue, and I told myself, am I even enjoying what I'm reading right now? And I figured that the answer was no. And then I thought, is it worth pushing through? And so I texted Femke, who has also read this book, and I think she DNF'd it even earlier on than I did. And Femke rarely DNFs. I rarely DNF, but same goes for Femke. We both don't really DNF books. But it was just not worth it, and I think I will get rid of this at some point because this is just not for me. I do want to say that if this is your favorite book ever, I'm not saying it's a bad book, it was just something that I didn't really enjoy reading, and that's okay because we all have our own tastes and we like our own things, and there's no shame in not liking something, so yeah. Then next up, a book that I wanted to read in January because of the title. I know it's not necessarily applicable, which I'll explain in a bit, but that is The 10,000 Doors of January. I thought it was perfect for the month of January. This is a portal fantasy, and I started reading that last year, and so I picked it up again, and I did quickly read through the first couple of bits that I had skipped and then continued. So this follows January, who is actually the daughter of I think a servant kind of the House of Locke, and so Locke kind of not really adopts her, but kind of. And January actually keeps on finding doors, hence why it says The 10,000 Doors of January. Through the story, there's also sort of a story about doors that January is reading, and I feel like the way in which this was written was really interesting. I did enjoy it in that fact, but the storyline for me was not interesting. I think the characters were quite plain, and they weren't as interesting as I would have liked. That for me, there was no true story to hold me in, if that makes sense. I wasn't interested in the doors. The extra story that goes in between, like a red thread through this book, was kind of boring to me. It was also really predictable. So the ending, I think I was not even halfway through this, and I had this idea of the ending in my head, and it was completely the same as the true ending. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, it doesn't help this book because it wasn't for me. And while it is a beautiful book to look at, and I think the writing style is really cool, so I'll definitely read more from this author, for me this was, I believe, a 2-star or 3-star. I think I gave this one 2 stars. Yeah, I gave this one 2 stars. It was just not a book that is for me. Then moving on, this is the second to last book already, so we're not really flying through them, but I'm not unhappy with my reading month, and that is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. This is about a woman who is from, can I say that before I spoil people? Okay, quickly check the synopsis to make sure I'm not spoiling you, but it is in the synopsis. I don't know these things because I don't read synopsises before I start going into books. But basically we follow Chu Chongba, who, we follow Chu Chongba's sister, who takes over his identity to go to a monastery, and then at some point we start following two sides of war. So this is, I think, in China that was under the rule of Mongol rule. In 1345, China lies under harsh Mongol rule. For the starving peasants of the Central Plains, greatness is only found in stories. So we follow both sides of this conquest, of this conflict, and the way in which the war is written and the strategy and what drives these individuals was really interesting. I did enjoy the way it was written, but I didn't really care about the main characters. So same goes, we had, I think, a eunuch that we followed, whose name I have, it's leaving me, and then we follow Chu, who goes to that monastery to become a boy, or turned into a boy to go to this monastery, and is fighting over her own fate. There's just things in this book that I feel could have been done better. It is a well-rounded, well-written book, and I will probably at some point read the sequel to this. The sequel's not out yet. I think this book is from 2021, and the sequel's coming out this year, so if you want to wait, then I would say wait until the sequel's out, because I think it's a duology. And I will probably read the sequel at some point, but I expected a lot more from this, from my own enjoyment. I didn't really care for the characters. I didn't really care for their journeys. There's a couple of characters that I thought were really interesting but weren't a major role, so that doesn't help. And it was an interesting book, but not the best one I've ever read. So those were all of my physical books done, and then there's one more book that I read due to the fact that I watched the movie. So I think I had this book on my TBR but wasn't really in my line of sight, and then actually watched the film with my partner, and I decided I wanted to read the book. And the book I'm talking about is Where the Crawdads Sing. The movie is beautiful, and a lot of the monologue and dialogue comes explicitly, like exactly from the book. The book, the way it was written, is so poetic, and I personally am a big fan of poems, of any type of prose, and the way in which Where the Crawdads Sing is written can only be described as flowery poem, kind of. It sounds strange to your ears probably, but it has this flair of the natural in it, which for me is absolutely beautiful. I loved the descriptions of the marshes, I loved the descriptions of the animals, but the way in which the story was told, because it's actually historical fiction, but it is part a thriller and a mystery as well, and I loved it. I think the characters are well-rounded, well-written, the story itself was beautifully done, and it was just so complete in a sense that sometimes with stories you miss certain details. This book was so detailed, yet it never felt as if the pace was off, and I just really enjoyed it. I actually read it in a night because I started around like 8 and I was done around 4 AM on a weekday. I work full-time, so you can expect how obsessed I was, because that doesn't really happen usually. I love it. It is beautiful, and I think I gave this one 4 stars because there were a couple of things that I was still, yeah, I gave it 4 stars. There were a couple of things that I would have preferred a bit over for it to truly be 5 stars, if that makes sense, but it was a beautiful book, and I can definitely recommend it if you want to try something different. That said, those were all 9 of the books that I read in January. I am not unhappy with the start of the year. I hope that I can keep this up and keep reading more and more, so that is really good. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I want to thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel and press that little bell icon so you can post notifications every single time that we post, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Bye!